very special welcome to our next guest. She is Dr. Carol Swain, one of America's most thoughtful and formidable public intellectuals. She's, among many other things, the host of Conversations with Dr. Carol Swain. She's the president of Be the People Project and the author, most recently, of Black Eye for America. Dr. Swain, it's great to have you back. Welcome once again to Securing America.
Thank you.
I had Elaine Donnelly of the Center for Military Readiness on yesterday, and she described in, I'm afraid, alarming detail what is happening to the United States military as a result of the effort to impose, well, what's been called critical race theory on our armed forces. The impact on the sort of division of our troops along racial lines, the impact that obviously has on unit cohesion and morale and readiness. And I wanted to just touch base with you, Carol. You've spent an enormous amount of time assessing and warning about and trying to counter this phenomenon of, well, a Maoist, racist agenda. And I don't know if you've looked at the military in particular, but I'm interested in your thoughts about what it's doing to our educational system, for one thing, but to our society more broadly, as well as our armed forces.
Well, Frank, you may remember that it wasn't too many years ago when we looked at the U.S. military as the example of a successful affirmative action where you
Yes.
did have diversity and inclusion and people being promoted by merit. And we
Mhm.
felt like that of all the institutions in society, the U.S. military got it correct. Well, all of that has changed because the meaning of diversity, equity, and inclusion has changed. Diversity is no longer about making sure you have people from different backgrounds and races included. It's about promoting groups that were historically disadvantaged and pushing down others that they feel don't deserve where they have attained. And inclusion is not about bringing in these people. It's about setting up little affinity groups where people will self-segregate. And equity is not about equal opportunity, it's about equal outcomes. And
Yes.
all of that is CRT, critical race theory, which is a critical theory that's rooted in postmodernism as well as Marxism,
Mm.
and that is what is influencing our military. And as far as military readiness, they're not ready for anything. They're
Mm.
only ready to party because it's not just critical race theory, it's critical queer theory, LGBT theory. And so the military is not a fighting force, it is a social engineering experiment.
Yeah. Obviously, there are an awful lot of men and women in uniform who think they're there to fight for their country, and indeed that's what they volunteered to do. But what you're describing really is the agenda that's being imposed upon them. There's a fellow by the name of Bishop Garrison. Who has been installed by the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, to oversee, this sort of countering extremism sort of office that apparently is sort of at the core of enforcing this so-called diversity, um, et cetera, agenda. It's frightening that this is being done, but let's
Right.
back the lens up a bit and just say what's happening in our schools is no less frightening, and yet we're told it's not actually being taught
Well,
in
Frank,
these academic institutions, public schools, and universities, and so on. Carol, you've spent most of your professional life in academia, either studying or teaching. Give us the straight story on how this agenda is being advanced in our academic institutions too.
well, first of all, it's affecting every institution, every sector of our society. And I would say that it is to the detriment of our nation. We are not ready for anything. And our children can't compete with children around the world because it is in K through 12 education. And the political left has a pat answer when asked about CRT. Now they're saying, oh, that's a course that's taught in law school. that's a course that's taught at universities. And to that I say, yes and no. Yes, there are courses offered on critical theory at colleges and universities, but there's also critical theory is a worldview that its adherents have produced books, videos, teaching materials, and they have produced literature that affects even kindergarten.
Hmm.
And some of these are civil rights books that are written from the perspective that demonizes all white people, without showing the fact that during the civil rights movement, it was a multiracial coalition that cut
Right.
across a religion that fought for civil rights in America. And the agenda of the critical theorists, it's all built around conflict theory, and it's built around racism, because it argues pretty much that all white people are racist and white
Hmm.
supremacists because of the color of their skin, that only white people can be racist, that all minorities are victims of discrimination. And we know that that's not true. And
Yeah.
it argues for segregation and lowered standards.
Right. This is so corrosive to a society like ours, and so terrifying, really, because it's working. The destructiveness, the dividing races or peoples of various kinds against one another, whether it's to the detriment of our fighting forces or, our kids, for heaven's sakes, let alone everybody in between. Carol, a product of this whole diversity, inclusion, equity agenda seems to be the process whereby President Biden selected a nominee to be the next justice of the Supreme Court, Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, that is. Katanya Brown Jackson is his nominee. She will be going before the United States Senate to be considered for this position next week. My hope would be that that you would be that nominee rather than her, but more to the point, that you would be called upon to testify about both the process whereby someone was clearly chosen not for the content of her character, but for the color of her skin and her gender, of course, as well. What does that mean for the law, for the court, for our process by which we move past these kind of issues of race and have once again a pluribus unum, and maybe on a higher scale than we ever have before?
Well, first of all, I've not been asked to testify. And if
Rats.
I had been asked to testify, I would have pointed out the fact that what we have is a political agenda where President Biden selected a nominee, selected that recommended by the most radical groups in America, including Black Lives Matter, that
Mm.
she is their candidate. And at a time when crime is escalating in America, pretty much they want to pick someone that wants to defund the police. It doesn't make a lot of sense.
Wow.
And I have problems with this process because the president, in announcing that he was only going to consider black women, starts off by violating the Constitution because he's discriminating against all other groups. He's violating the U.S. Civil Rights law, as well as our Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution, and he is selecting someone, that she has the Ivy League degree, so she checks that box.
Hmm.
She has black skin, she's a woman, she checks that box. But when it comes to being connected with the American people, someone who will follow the law, there's no evidence that this person will, because she's wedded to an agenda. The other concern that I have is that there are at least two cases that will be heard by the Supreme Court in the fall, that uh, soon, that have to do with affirmative action and voting rights. And if she is confirmed and placed on the court, that will mean that you have someone that's not going to look at the Constitution and adhere to it and think about the statutory law. you have someone that is going to vote in a very predictable manner because she is appointed to advance a progressive agenda.
Yeah. And as you say, the fact that she was the strongly recommended candidate of people who have really made no secret, talk about Marxists, the Black Lives Matter organization founders are avowed practicing Marxists and destroying the courts, destroying the rule of law, destroying the Constitution, destroying the country, or their agenda. It's absolutely shocking that somebody like this would be advanced. Do you anticipate that she is going to be closely scrutinized on these grounds, Carol Swain?
I doubt it, and I keep hearing that they have the votes, and maybe the Democrats have the votes. I would certainly hope that Republicans would not join in supporting her. I think that the country would be better off if we must, limit it to the three black women that the president said he looked at. My choice would have been the woman from South Carolina. I believe her name was Childers.
Yeah.
Um, she would
she
have
she
been
was
my
she was
preference.
passed over in favor of the Black Lives Matter candidate. Alas, I hope that there's still time for you to testify on this nominee. But Carol, thank you for your testimony here. We appreciate so much your work and look forward to our next visit with you in the near future.
Thank you.
Next up, we're going to have a conversation with the great Eric Metaxas about spiritual warfare in America and around the world.